What is up, everybody? We're back on Carnivore Experiment. I got Haley over here. Haley, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Super excited to be back filming the Carnivore Experiment. We took a bit of a hiatus, but we're back to it again. Super excited about it.
We are back to business. As you guys know, we left off last episode talking about Haley's competition, and there's been a lot of things that have happened in this time that we have not recorded yet, including a little bit of experimentation with some non-carnivore variables that have a very interesting result for Haley that we're going to talk about today that has really relevant results for all of you listening. If you are on a carnivore diet and you've thought about maybe, adding in some other things that are per se non-carnivore. If that's you, stick with us this whole episode, okay? Because we got a lot of things we're going to cover here, and it definitely will benefit you to hear through it. So, Haley, give me the breakdown here. We left off last episode. Competition's finished. We did all that business. It was great. And then where did we kind of go from there? Because we've had a big gap of time, but right after the show, there were some things that we decided to implement as experiments because Haley loves to experiment, and so do I. And, again, you guys, as we always talk about on the show, we are coaches, but we do not only coach carnivores, right? Like we help people at all stages of whatever journey, whatever type of diet they want, get results in the fitness industry. So, we're always testing things a little bit differently than you would hear the standard kind of, the hardcore carnivore people community. And that kind of brought us to what we did post-competition for you, Haley. So let's shed a little light there.
Yeah, so just to catch anybody up to speed, because we have had a little bit of a break, I did 2 back-to-back bodybuilding competitions in the bikini division, full carnivore. Came out of that, announced that we were going to do a half marathon, staying carnivore, and then also we tacked on doing a powerlifting competition with that. So we have nationals next year, a powerlifting competition next year, and marathon training. And then I was like, hey, Ryan, let's experiment with some carbs. I had been strict carnivore for about 8 months at this point. Yep. And Ryan was like, all right, yeah, like if you want to see how your body responds, how things react, if you're ready to like try some carbs, let's go for it. He did have some ideas and theories of how things were going to pan out, and he was pretty spot on all of those things, but I still wanted to experiment for myself. Yep. And he just essentially was like, all right, go have a free meal with carbs. Let's see how you feel. Let's see what happens. And I opened up that free meal. My first carb after like 8 months of no carbs was literally M&Ms with my kids. And then I had a few other things that evening that weren't carnivore, like rolls at dinner, maybe some fruit, maybe some other things. And it was pretty crazy. The food did not taste at all how my brain, like how I thought I remembered it to taste. It did not taste good. My body was very I felt like I was having aversions to the food where it just tasted really bad. Yep. But I will say my sugar cravings came raging back, unlike any kind of cravings I'd ever experienced, which I did not anticipate that. But Ryan warned me. He was like, if you're going to do this, just be prepared to battle the most intense cravings you've ever had in your entire life. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I've had cravings before, whatever. No, like they were rough. And we went into actually marathon training. I have an ankle injury, which if you follow me on Instagram, you know all about. And we went into marathon training and I was doing really great with marathon training. And then I added in the carbs and my ankle started causing me all kinds of issues, which makes absolutely no sense outside of being able to chalk it up to inflammation from the foods that I was eating. Right. So it didn't go great. It was not, in my opinion, it was great to experiment in the sense of like finding out for myself what would happen, but the reality of how long it took me to recover from eating carbs and how it made me feel, and now I'm in physical therapy for my ankle. I'm just like, man, probably like definitely wasn't worth it. Like all the progress that had been made with my body on carnivore, it kind of ricocheted me back way harder for way longer than I anticipated. I was like, oh, it'll be a few-day thing and then I'll be back to it. And that's not how it works. So yeah, it was pretty brutal. And Ryan's obviously been here for the whole thing because I do weekly check-ins with him, and it's been it was more intense than I expected it to be, for sure.
Yeah, definitely was intense. And even, in the scope of what you would assume would happen, the positive sides of it did happen in the sense, right? Like the things people want to talk about, right? Like, oh, you get to eat this and that, you get to have that, you get to have a little bit of a refuel, recharge, whatever, great. But the negatives that people do not understand, right? And this is what I always try to talk to people that are carnivore, especially about, is, everybody, and we talked about it right before this episode, everybody pretty much goes through their life with certain things that they, ailments they have that they just deal with, right? And that's just the way it is. Like, ankle, like you said, your ankle, okay, bad ankle, that's what you got, right? Somebody else got a bad shoulder, somebody else got a bad elbow, somebody else has, depression or mental health issues or whatever, and they just say, hey, this is who I am, this is the way it is, this is how I feel, blah, blah, blah. Or, allergies, things where people constantly runny nose, they're coughing all the time, they just have this and that. Everybody goes through life with things like this, right? And the crazy thing is, once you go carnivore, a lot of people, they see those things go away, and so then you forget about it, right? Like you forget what it's like to not have that crazy inflammation or not have those allergies or not have those things, especially when you've been doing it longer duration, right? And I think this is why, in combination with a lot of content these days that tries to push carbs in a sense and fruit, and you should try honey and you should try this and that, right? To carnivores, it ends up making you be like, oh, well, maybe there is something there. Maybe there really is a cool variable that I'll gain. What happens if I take my steak and I also eat fruit with it, or I eat, a cupcake, or I eat this and that, or I have some ice cream? What's going to happen? I'm going to feel good, because I feel good, and then I'm adding carbs to it, so I should feel better, in the sense of that. But the truth is, every time, and I mean, Haley's not the only carnivore I coach. I've coached carnivores a long time. I've coached keto people a long time, which is very close to carnivore anyway. You always see anytime somebody goes and breaks, their streak on either carnivore, keto, animal-based, whatever you want to call it, what ends up happening is there's a quick like, oh, it feels great. And then boom, you feel terrible for quite a long time. And the rebound effect of that takes a lot longer, right? Like, cheat meals are a thing in the normal world. You guys, like bodybuilding, especially. Haley is a bodybuilder. We're bodybuilding coaches. We coach people that compete. The most common thing someone can do after they've dieted a long time and they've done a competition is go then for a cheat meal after, right? And that's probably part of why we were like, okay, cool, let's test it out now. Like, we didn't test carbs on prep because, for one, we were doing a carnivore prep, and for two, that's a mega unknown variable. But after the show's done, what else are we doing? We're running, we're doing some powerlifting's been added now to the docket, but these things are not necessarily physique dependent, so we have a lot more play. But what ends up happening, right, is, again, it was a quick moment of like, hey, this might be good. And it didn't even sound like it was, right? Like, you didn't even enjoy the taste. But somebody else, right, who's not carnivore, they'll be like, oh, yeah, let's go out to eat. Let's have freaking this. And, that's been you before. That's been many people that are listening. Anybody who was carnivore, at one point you weren't, and you looked forward to, a donut, a piece of cake, a pizza slice, whatever it was. And then you realize once you take these things out of your environment, you almost get, in a way, selfish is what I'd say, right? Like, you get selfish with how good you can feel carnivore. So then you're like, oh, this is just the way it is. And you're not grateful for it because, oh, I'm normal. I feel great. Oh, my ankle that hurt, my head, my elbow, whatever. My allergies are gone. Then you're likely to screw it up, right? So needless to say, the Haley carb experiment, we could call it, did not go as planned. And originally, I think we did talk about it on this podcast. We had planned for Haley to actually go into doing cheat meals more often after the competition, right? We did talk about that some, yes?
We were like, oh, let's throw in a cheat meal once a week where I'll go out on a date, throw carbs in. Because I had been doing dates, but I would just stay carnivore, right? Like I would just go eat steak, that kind of thing. And we had the mentality of throwing in more carbs once a week just for like a free meal.
Yeah, exactly. Which, again, common thing. A lot of people dieting, a lot of people doing this. Carnivore, though, again, it goes into its own category, because I think people need to remember when you're doing carnivore, it's not just a diet. It's not just a good way to lose body fat or lose weight. It does do that. That's awesome for a lot of people, right? We used it for bodybuilding show prep. That's great. But we also used it, as Haley's talked about on this podcast, as, something to help mental health, something to help her injuries, her inflammation, her ankle in the sense, which, really neither of us really, I mean, I didn't even think about it that whole time, but we were already doing cardio. Like Haley was doing cardio. She was running. We were doing all this, no problems. Carbs come in, boom, all of a sudden derailed, So it's very interesting how much these things can actually affect you. And I think, I've seen some stuff being posted on the internet, which I just talked to you about before we started this, of people saying, oh, carnivore actually is terrible because it just makes you sensitive to things. Like if you go carnivore, then you just become sensitive to all these different things that you wouldn't normally be. And I don't think that's the case. I think that people have problems and you just deal with them and that becomes your normal life, right? Like I had a back pain for years after I injured my back deadlifting. I had my left leg was numb for 3 years. Like I wasn't every day like, oh, my leg. No, that's just part of my fucking life. So, at the end of the day, again, we just go through it. But had it gone away, like if that came back now, I'd be like, whoa, what the heck is the issue? Why is that happening? Right. But you don't think about it in the moment. So I think a lot of people have that. And, the cheat meal thing, even if you can mentally do it, which some people can, like I've seen this, some people can go off. A big one coming up this quarter of the year, right, is holidays. Carnivore folks end up getting tempted. I've seen, even some mega carnivore, mega influencers, if you will, out there, the leaders of the pack, sometimes even go off their diet for, Christmas or whatever. And, what you see is, again, the same repeated factor that there's always going to be a little bit of a recovery period. Some people can go though, and they can sit down and say, boom, there it is. I'm good. Okay. I ate it. But either way, even if you mentally get right back to it tomorrow, which most people won't, right? Like that's the biggest problem. You will still have the fact that you changed your whole physiology. You've changed your fat adaptation metabolism and put it now into a sugar burning metabolism for against its will, basically, right? So now you have the whole process of going back through ketosis, going back out, and you experienced that, Haley. Why don't we talk a little bit about that, right? So in interim, I mean, you didn't enjoy eating the foods you ate yet. Like you said, it spiked some cravings. And then what did you experience like that week of, you had some carbs and we had talked and you were like, okay, we decided you got to get back to strict carnivore. And then what happens, right? What happens then?
Well, the cravings were really intense and it took me a while to get back to strict carnivore. Like there was even a phase where I had messaged Ryan. I was like, fuck, we're trying not to cuss. So I'm trying to get better about that. But I was like, I fell off. Like we have M&Ms in the house. I just kept eating them, even though they didn't necessarily taste good. My brain was like, oh my gosh, all the sugar, right? Like, and I really started realizing just how addicted to sugar I was. And it almost made me realize all of these things, like how much junk I ate in college, like how much drinking I had done when I was younger, and all of these things, like the way that I treated my body for such a massive chunk of my life, essentially in my 20s, the amount of sugar I ate, the amount of, times I went out and did things. It's like how, like that doesn't just go nowhere. Like what kind of foundation does that set for my body? Can someone truly be addicted to sugar? Is sugar similar to other extremely addictive substances like say nicotine, right? Maybe it doesn't have, obviously the same effect as other addictive substances, but is there an addictive factor? And I think for the most part, we all know that the answer to that is yes, is it is addictive. You can be addicted to those things. And I think I just realized how easy it is, especially if you have a foundation of essentially being addicted to sugar, how hard it is once you introduce those things back in to like flip the switch and go back to the level of self-discipline that you had before. And I think a lot of people could relate to that. And during the experimental phase, even, which this occurred to me like while we were chatting, one of the reasons I went carnivore was for mental health. And then we introduced the carbs. I kind of fell off social media. I stopped posting. And it was very interesting because those were very old tendencies for me to fall into that had been dead for like almost, 8 months now since being carnivore. So it was like eating carbs kind of ricocheted all of these like bad habits into play. It kind of spiked all of these negative tendencies that I used to have that I fought really hard against. Whereas when I'm carnivore and I'm not eating sugar and it's not doing all of these, like having these compound of like effects in my life, my energy was shot. I stopped waking up in the morning. I had brain fog during the day. I mean, it affected absolutely everything. It wasn't just that it tasted bad and I had really strong cravings. It was like less motivated, not waking up in the morning, struggling with cravings, brain fog coming back into play, just all of these little things building. And so then I kind of started researching more in like, how does ketosis affect specifically women? How does coming out of ketosis affect women? How long does it take? Really, because some people are like, oh, it takes a few days to get back into ketosis. But really, if you have this history of addiction to something and then you introduce that thing back into it, it's not a few days to get that out of your system again, right? Whether it's sugar, whether it's nicotine, it's like if you take somebody who's addicted to cigarettes and they quit for 8 months and all of a sudden they have one cigarette, right? Then you're more likely to binge on cigarettes for a few weeks before you're able to quit again. And I would argue that that kind of response in the body is the same with sugar based on my personal experience with experimenting with carbs again. And even so much so that like my cycle, I know a lot of women on Instagram, they'll message me about like PCOS or going carnivore for PCOS. My cycle after having carbs was way heavier, way longer, way more cramping, way more intense than it had been the last 8 months of being carnivore. So even that was a drastic change where my cramps were so bad where I was like stopping in the kitchen, having to like take a breath for a second where I'm like, wow, I have not had to deal with anything like this in so long. And it goes back to your point of you get so used to feeling good that you're kind of like, oh, I can throw this in back in for just like a splash here. I can experiment with that. And maybe some people can. Maybe some people truly are doing carnivore for a diet or for aesthetic reasons or just to try it out. But then there are people who've seen real life-changing benefits like mental health, polycystic ovary syndrome, the way that it's affected my thyroid medication absorption. Like those are huge, huge things that have very, drastic impacts on my day-to-day life. And those things were kind of a non-issue for 8 months. And then, we threw back in carbs because I really wanted to. I was like, I want to do this. I can't imagine not eating a cookie for the rest of my life. Just stupid stuff. And then we tried those things and it's been like a whole thing for a month now where it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm still coming back from opening that door and all of the negative implications it's had on my health. Just from cravings all the way to like the way my body is literally responding through my cycle, which is a huge, like every woman goes through every month, so it's just crazy. I feel like I'm still every day realizing things where I'm like, oh my gosh, that happened, or oh my gosh, this happened. And the more I'm getting back out of that brain fog phase, it's like I'm able to realize more and more things. Or even this morning, I woke up easier, whereas it's been a struggle for the past few weeks to wake up. But on carnivore, strict carnivore, deep into carnivore, it was like 4 a.m., no problem, up out of bed to the gym. And I can feel I'm slowly getting back to that, but it's not like, oh, you'll get back to it in a few days. I feel like it takes like a month, especially for women with our hormones, with the way our cycles work. I mean, I would even argue like I'll probably feel really good in a month from now. I think I'll feel back into it another 30 days from now of being strict carnivore. It's not like in my brain where I was like, oh, you can flip the switch and have this, and then you go back into ketosis the next few days. Like that, for me at least, is not what I found to be the case with the way it's impacted like the very many different levels of my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Because, again, that's what I mean. That's what people need to remember too on carnivore, right?
Yeah.
It's like you did often, like if you just want to lose a couple pounds, people, I mean, there's a million diets that'll do that job for you and you don't got to go carnivore. So you got to remember like why you actually started when you're sitting here thinking, okay, maybe I should add some fruit. I should add some honey. I should add, some other carbs. I want to have cheat meals. I want to do this and that. You got to really think. And also to delineate, there is no Like, I'm not the believer of that, oh, fruit carbs are better than the carbs from a donut, or I don't believe in this stuff, you guys. I mean, I know too much to say that that is not the case. It's all the same compounds. It's all accepted the same way in your body. So, just because Haley broke her carnivore with M&Ms doesn't really make a difference. Could have been honey, could have been fruit, could have been any of that. And she had those things during that time as well. And all the results end up being the same, folks. So, I mean, again, it's one of those things where you can go tomato with that and say, oh, yeah, is a fruit definitely better than this? Well, they all go to sugar when you eat them. So that's going to be the same thing either way in that sense. And I mean, you got to remember too, okay, a lot of people that are going to do carnivore and do it consistently, they have oftentimes a handful of benefits that they're receiving that they didn't have prior, that they would want to have, ongoing. So it's not really about like, oh, I just want to lose a couple pounds. I mean, there's a million ways you could do that without having to go carnivore. So, don't get crazy in your own head and get, ungrateful for how great you actually feel. Because like Haley's saying, it will take, I think I said that to you a few weeks ago. I was like, it'll be 3-4 weeks before anything is going to be back. And what's funny is you might think that anybody who's not carnivore yet watching this being like, whoa, that's crazy, like I would never even do that because that would just be terrible. Then if I had to, if I fell off, it would take that long. Well, here's the crazy part, right? If this was the first time Haley had done it, she'd already be feeling the best she ever felt. That's the thing nobody remembers, right? Even just in this window of time from now, since the last carbs, she'd already have been feeling now really, really good back then when we had started. The only difference is now she knows the level of how good she can actually feel. So that's the level you're chasing back to. That's why it takes so much longer, right? Somebody on the couch today who's eating Doritos and has the worst type of diet and is unhappy with where they're at and want to lose 100 pounds, whatever, you start carnivore tomorrow, you will feel better tomorrow. You don't got to wait a month. You don't got to wait, a week. You don't got to do all that. You'll start feeling differences right away. The difference is Haley was already adapted. She was already all the way there. She had been strict even on, lion diet for a large period of time. And, when you do that, to get back to how good you felt, there will be a longer period of time. So it's kind of like anybody who's ever gone on vacation, right? Like everybody goes on vacation. This has never happened to me. Maybe this happens to you, Haley, or other people out here listening. But like normally when I go on vacation, I do not come back feeling better. I come back like, holy shit, I got to get all my things done again. I got to get in the gym. I got to get, this done. I got to get my routine back. And that usually alone will take me 2-3 weeks to even be like, okay, I got my groove back. So, I mean, imagine taking your whole diet and kind of going, even though it wasn't, because I want to make this noted to people, like it is not the only thing Haley, you ate. It is not the only thing. You were still eating meat and doing all this and that. You just had eaten other things. And also it was not a month, folks. We're talking about a month of time since we last podcast, but she was not off. We're talking about a handful of times of having some carbs.
Like 3 times. And I still had like steak. I still had eggs. I would probably even arguably some of those days I didn't even break like the standard ketosis, right? It would be like I had enough of carbs to be like, oh, this wasn't carnivore. But if you added up the total grams, it was maybe like 60, 50. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was just stuffing my face with all of these just, buckets of carbs. It was just genuinely like, let's throw carbs in, realistic to what it would look like in my life with my kids. And what are like, if I'm going to have carbs, if I'm going to break it, it's going to be over something fun, watching a movie with my kids. Like that was my mentality. It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying to add in carbs back permanently daily. So let's start with fruit and honey. Although I did have fruit and honey, and I will tell you, I felt the exact same as when I had M&Ms. I still wanted buckets of honey and fruit. You know what I mean? Like I still wanted like a ridiculous amount more of those things than my body would need or would be beneficial, if that makes sense. It's not good to just eat like a pound, 2 pounds of strawberries. Like that does all these kinds of things to your digestion. It just does all of these things, but that was still the response in my brain. It didn't matter what it was. It just wanted more of that sugary thing, right? It's not like I was craving sweet potatoes. It's not like I was craving like what we considered standard healthy carbs. It was genuinely like, sugar. Like what is the fastest way to get the most sugar, which I think just leads back to, wow, I was like really addicted to sugar before the carnivore diet.
Right.
And that's why the cravings are so freaking intense,
Yeah.
which I've had these conversations with other people who've done carnivore or animal based. And then they add in, they're like, oh, for my birthday, I went and did XYZ. And then all of their pains came back. They had migraines. They had all these ailments that were better. And they're like, my cravings are the worst I've ever experienced in my entire life. Yep. And you feel like garbage. It's not... it's just, I've never talked to somebody who's had real life-changing benefits from the carnivore diet. And then they try carbs and they're like, wow, I'm really glad I did that.
Yeah. And I mean, there is, again, this push for some reason from some folks these days to say you should eat fruit and you should eat honey and you should do this and that. That, in my opinion, again, is going to be the same result, because this is what people don't really understand about carbs, and also why, even from the crazy, recommendations of our food pyramids and so on and so forth that we all have, right? And the recommendations of what you need for protein and what you need, there isn't one for carbs, even in that realm, right? Because again, all carbs, when you eat them, they in some form or another do break down into sugar. That's it. So, if you find benefits from those things, then sure. But again, the large mass production of food has been what makes everybody, want carbs in their food. All these corporations, all these, not to get crazy. I won't get crazy on this podcast, you guys, don't worry. But they want you eating cheap things. They don't want you eating all these other things. So put sugar in everything, put carbs in everything, do all this and that, because it's really cheap for us to make and we can sell it to you. And then you become addicted to it. Go figure. And you want more of it. So, you start eating the Doritos, and then you go buy 6 other bags of Doritos because now you're on the Dorito train, or whatever it is, there's for anyone out here who's considering carnivore or doing it or anything else, you could think about your past. You could think about the ways that you approached all those foods and all those choices and where it led you in life to the point where now you're considering, honestly, one of the most radical diets, probably the most radical diet in the world, even though it is still not that crazy when you actually think about it evolutionarily or in the scope of what humans are, or species specific diets or things like that. If you think about any other animal,
climate, weather, right? Everything. Yeah.
You think about, if you think about all these other things, right? You start thinking about diets, it really doesn't make any difference. You've just been told something else your whole life, right? So again, it's seen the wrong way in the sense of that, these carbs can be beneficial and things. And I've never seen it be beneficial. And it's mainly also too, even if you can mentally do it, like I said, which some people can, great, whatever. Like I have clients, they'll say they want to have a cheat meal or a free meal, we call it sometimes, whatever. And they are not carnivore. Maybe they are, whatever. It's the same thing. They can go out, they can eat something, they can eat it, and they can get out of the table and they go back to work. That's my rule for any time anybody wants to do that. Right. And it's obviously, don't binge, don't be crazy, don't overdo it, don't try to eat 10,000 calories, don't be crazy with it, but you can go out, have a meal, whatever, eat till you're satisfied and get up and it's over. As soon as you leave the chair, game over, we're back to work, right? So some people can do that and it works okay. It always, however, slows their progress, right? And that's the thing. People, you got to think about that. If you're on a weight loss journey or you're on a body fat journey or you're trying to be most optimal, whatever it is, you're slowing your progress down when you go take that, free meal, cheat meal, whatever it is, no matter who you are, you're still taking away from it. Like people convince themselves that these things are beneficial because other things they saw on probably Instagram or somewhere else or YouTube. Like, oh, I need cheat meals. Oh, this person does a cheat meal. Oh, that person ate carbs. They're carnivore. I should do. No, you don't. You know what you need to do? What works best for you? That's what ends up happening all the time, right? So if something's working, it's worth saying. If it's not broken, don't try to fix it, which unfortunately is human nature to try to do. And, we can always get in our own heads trying to come up with the next answer, the next thing. Oh, can I make this better? Can I make this better? And you end up breaking a perfect machine in that way, right? Yeah. Like how many of you get in your car every day and it drives you to work or it drives you to store or it drives you and your kids around, wherever, drops them off at school? Well, this would be like if you looked at your car then and said, I wonder how I can improve this. this. Maybe I'll add 3 extra wheels to it, and maybe I'll add this. What the hell is this going to do for you, right? Like, why are you sitting here trying to come up with a better vehicle than you already have that is doing the job it needs to do? And that's, for a lot of people, carnivore diet. So don't play with it. If it's working and it's good, don't play with it. If you tried it and it's not working, get away from it. Try something else then. Find what works for you. I'm not a firm believer that everybody in the world needs to be on the carnivore diet or would benefit from it. I think there's a whole bunch of people that, you know, are never going to get to there mentally. So what do we do with them? We just say, oh, sorry, you guys are all, you're dead. It's over. Game over. Goodbye. Like, have a life full of disease and everything else. No, you can still take somebody that will not eat carnivore and help them. You can still take somebody who will not eat carnivore and get them like in the gym or doing cardio or improving their diet or reducing this and that. And they could still get results. And maybe one day they do get to carnivore, right? I'm totally off topic, but I think that's a huge issue. I think that's a huge problem with carnivore. And like what we try to bring with this podcast, those of you listening, if you made it this far, please share it with somebody, right? It's like, we're not trying to be the kind of like draconian, we could call it, carnivore, you know, people out there that are like, if you're not carnivore, you're dead to me. I mean, that's the same stuff the vegans do, you guys. Not that I have anything against vegans. Okay, whatever. If you choose vegan, go ahead. Just don't come in my court, you know, but the point is, either way, we're not trying to bring that. We're trying to help people get from where they are to maybe where, you know, it could be carnivore eventually in maybe 5 years, 10 years, whatever. Right. But you got to get somebody where they're at, and you got to help them where they are. So, you know, if you can listen to this and you can take any bit of information out here, right? Like, really what we're talking about as a whole. Yeah, we're saying Haley was on carnivore. She went off, and here we are. We're talking about a cheat meal. We're talking about this idea of having cheat meals or free meals or, you know, different things like that that really do apply to everybody, because dare I say the exact same things that happened to you, Haley, aside from, you know, the boosted inflammation and maybe the mental health stuff and other things that we knew you had going, you know, into carnivore as a good reason to do it. Those same effects are going to happen to pretty much everyone, no matter their dietary choice. Yeah. Like, this is, you know, how many times have we heard in the bodybuilding world, hey, the post-show blues, all this stuff, right? As soon as your show ends, everything. And you know why? Because most people go off the rails after their comp. They've been on a good diet. They've been doing this and that. They go eat everything under the sun. They got boxes of candy and other junk saved, and they eat it. And they get post-show blues. Are you getting post-show blues? Or are you, you know, poisoning your mind with all kinds of foods that were out of your diet? It's very interesting to think about, you know. Also, like flu season, not to get super crazy, I'm going to stop yapping, but like flu season, right? Like where we're entering now as we record this, beginning of October, this is when everybody's getting sick, turning and burning, getting sick, right? It's also the time of year that everywhere you go, there's cookies and there's candy and there's, you know, Christmas cookies here and Halloween candy there, and you're eating garbage all the time, right? And all of a sudden, everybody's getting sick. It's kind of, when you start thinking about these things, you guys, I don't want to get crazy, but I'm getting there, so I'll stop. But like, you start thinking about these things, that's what happens. It's very interesting when you realize the food that you eat can fuel literally all functions of your life, which, you know, you think about that and you're like, wow, that's crazy. But how the hell has that become crazy when you really think about it?
Yeah. Well, and even to kind of what you were saying, a point that I want to make very clear is when I was talking about how intense cravings were, I don't want people to hear that and be like, oh, that was her body telling her that she needs sugar back in her life. There was not a single time that I ate something off carnivore that after that meal, I felt better. I had headaches. I would, you know, tell my husband, wow, I feel like garbage. Like I feel like a literal garbage can. And, you know, even he would make comments of like, you know, you seem really edgy, like what's going on? I'm like, it's the food. It's the food. Like my body is not processing this well. And so I wanted to make that so clear that I gave it several chances within, you know, a week to try it out. And what kept bringing me back was like the intense cravings, but it was never worth it. It was never like, oh, wow, I feel energized, right? It was always like, wow, I need to take a freaking nap. And it was only when I finally had steak again or, you know, ribs again or eggs and bacon that I was just like, wow, I feel really good. Like my body needed that. And so I wanted to make that very clear distinction because I would hate for people to hear the former and be like, wow, her body was probably telling her that she needed sugar. Absolutely freaking not. Like my body had like nowhere, like it had nothing to do. it did not know how to process it. And I would say down to like my digestion was wrecked. Like everything was negatively impacted. Even one of my girlfriends, like she had come over during a span of time where I was eating the carbs and I was taking my rings off and she was like, Haley, your hands are so swollen. I was like, I know, I am literally swelling up. She's like, it's like you're having an allergic reaction. I'm like, dude, my body cannot digest, like it cannot process this. Like I had to literally, like my watch, you could see my watch imprint in my wrist. And this, it sounds crazy, but I'm like, after not eating garbage for 8 months and feeling so good and so optimal, and all of a sudden for a week, you know, dumping garbage in here and there, which still I would argue that that week of me eating those things, my diet was still significantly healthier than the vast majority of people's. It just tanked everything. And then it threw me out of whack, I would say, for a solid month. It just was like all of these issues came raging back within, you know, within one meal. And I didn't, in my brain before, I was like, oh, that's not going to happen. It's just a little bit, you know, it's just like a little bit of, you know, the sugar, a little bit of the dyes, a little bit of the processed junk. But the reality is that stuff is fake to the body. So it does not, your body like does not know how to digest those things, and it throws off the way every little mechanism in the body works, down to where the way like neurons fire in the brain, you know, and you can read about it. Like, you know, Chris, I believe his name is like Chris Palmer, is like revolutionizing the way that ketones affect the brain and heal the brain and help people with depression and heal schizophrenia, like all from diet. Like these are dietary things where he's literally been able to heal schizophrenia by putting people into ketosis. And that is freaking insane. Your diet, healing your brain. And it sounds insane. And then when you really think about it, it's like, yeah, of course, like your body can only operate as well as you treat it. You can only function as well as the fuel you put in your tank. If you take a non-diesel car and you put diesel in it, it's not going to work very well. And I think that that's just what everybody does. We're supposed to be eating these whole foods, animal, you know, meats and stuff. And then we go and eat all this junk. And then we have all of these issues. People are depressed. We're getting cancer, all of these things. Again, not to spiral down like the crazy road that we tend to spiral down, but like what you eat affects every aspect of the way your body functions. Literally, you know, it is literally how you live. And so I think, you know, it's just easy to forget that that's like actually what's happening when you consume food.
It's 100% easy. And, you know, a lot of the things people gravitate to, you once you get space from them, you don't look at them the same way anyway, right? And anybody can think back on, you know, people don't do this with food, but you do this with other things. Like a lot of people be like, oh, yeah, when I was in college, I drank a lot. Now I don't drink at all because I don't see the point of doing that anymore, or whatever it is, right? Or, you know, people do that with all kinds, or maybe you used to smoke or you did something else. And like, I will make the direct comparison of like sugar and food is just another drug. It's just an acceptable drug, just like everything else that's out there. Like most food is unfortunately engineered to make you addicted to it. And that is the truth. That is the factor. The foods that are literally just the few things that are left that are untouched by mankind. I mean, like even fruits and vegetables, folks, are engineered to be a certain way. Like, has anybody on this podcast ever seen what a real banana looks like? No, you probably haven't. Maybe there's like 4 or 5 of you out there. A real true banana that grows in the wild is so much seeds that you couldn't even eat it. And guess what? It's bitter and it tastes terrible. And, you know, this is many fruits. But over time, we have science that says, oh, take this gene, put that one there, and we'll take this. Oh, we'll make watermelons that don't have seeds. Take that out of there, and we'll do this and that. And now you're out here eating these Frankenstein-made different, you know, food products that are crazy. Granted, this is the same, you know, this is what carnivores won't say, but I'll say it, is this is the same with a lot of livestock and things too, right? We're engineering animals, but, you know, animal evolution is far longer than plants. Like you can make a plant like that guy that makes all the hottest peppers in the world. You know who I'm talking about, Haley? It's like he's the guy okay, so there's like a guy and every year he turns out a new pepper. He's like, I made the new world's hottest pepper, and everybody goes and eats it in the competition or whatever. So he's making an entirely new plant within a year because you can do that. Yeah. You can't do that. Nobody's made a new cow yet, you guys. Like nobody's made a new, you know, they're still all within the animals. Yeah, you can feed them a certain way and raise them a certain way and give them certain whatever medicines, antibiotics. I don't know what they do. But the point is that stuff doesn't have effect in the entire organism for like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of evolution, which we're not at. So, plants and fruit and other things do. And either way, though, you wouldn't have access to all this like we do anyway. Even if you can drive in your car for 10 minutes through your town and you'll see 20 different stores where you can go buy way too much food that normally that is not the way that, any other living organism in the world, not even your dog, can go walk through your house and eat whatever they want, unless, you got a wild dog and you got too much stuff out. But like, really, you control your dog's diet. Most people don't control their own diet. And even then, the only two animals, species, if you will, that get fat are humans and the pets we own, right? And like, that's the truth. Nobody thinks about this. You don't go out you don't see fat birds flying around. You're like, wow, that's a really fat hawk right there. That guy can barely keep up. Geez, what's he No, you don't see this because it doesn't happen. What's natural and what's nature is what is out there. And, what we do and what we try to engineer is what causes a lot of the problems. So if you've watched this far, what you need to know is like, skip the cheat meal. Okay. Don't go for the cheat meal. Don't try the cheat day. Like, honestly, or if you're going to go for it, you're going to try to have a cheat meal. You're going to try to have a cheat day. You're going to do any of that. You're going to run the risk of, having the issue with the carbs. You're going to run the issue of maybe going all the way backwards. You're going to run the issue of maybe not being carnivore anymore. You're going to run the issue of having a lot of problems that you just don't need to face. At the very least, you're going to have to go out of ketosis, back into ketosis. And all of that is not necessarily going to be worth it, because like literally in the first 5 minutes after you eat whatever that supposedly is going to be so good, you'll enjoy it for those seconds. And then it will be a long road to recover. It's just not really worth it, especially if you're on a good stride for your health, for your wellness. You're trying to lose weight. You have all these issues or whatever that you're trying to be ahead of it. Then don't give up on yourself. That's how I tell you, like, just fucking stay on it and keep going and keep trying and realize that, hey, you know what? We did the experiment for you. Other people have done it. It doesn't really show any benefit. There's, maybe some people telling you to eat fruit and honey and whatever else, but you know what? Something tells me they're going to start selling it too. Point is, either way, you got to understand that you got to do what's working best for you. And if it's working, don't mess with it. Just trust us. Trust the carnivore experimenters and just stay on the damn diet and everything's going to be better.
Yeah.
Anything else we got to add in here, Haley?
No, I mean, that's essentially it. Like I feel like one of the reasons we started the podcast was literally just because I started experimenting with the diet and we saw so many benefits. We're like, we should just talk about this. And we were getting so many questions online. Yeah. And that's how all of this has come about. That's why this is even here, is because one day I was like, oh, you were like, you should try it for XYZ. And the benefits have become very vast. And then, experimented with carbs. It has been a huge setback, but once again, very valid for the sake of the experiment and finding things out, learning more about it, seeing how the body responds, how I specifically have responded with, my certain sets of things that have benefited from eating this way. And, I mean, it's all pretty crazy. I mean, it is all pretty crazy. And like you said, I don't think that this diet is like one diet fits all for everyone. But I do think if somebody's curious about it, or if they've been like, oh, wow, she has PCOS and she found benefits from it, maybe it's worth for me trying it or experimenting with it. There is just no harm in trying it. You know what I mean? And then if you try it and you decide you don't like it, or your doctor makes you feel uncomfortable about it, or, XYZ, you don't have to stick with it. It's your health. It's your body. You get to experiment with what you want. But I will say, if you want to, see how good you can feel and like really push the boundaries of like fasting from garbage in the world and be like, oh, let's see how natural I can eat. Like if there were no grocery stores, if there were, if it was the dead of winter and we had no technology and no greenhouses and none of that, much how a lot of people were way back in the day, what would you be left with? You would be left with like meat and then like canned goods, essentially, that, you would ration because it was your family canning things in your basement and it was maybe like pickles and you wouldn't eat like 100 grams of like carbs worth of pickles anyways, if that makes sense. So I don't know. I mean, it seems to me, the further I've gotten into the diet, the more natural the diet seems to humans to eat this way. And that's just become my belief about it. But yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, I don't really have much to add except for that, we're just here sharing things, sharing our findings. And if you're doing carnivore and you want to experiment with carbs and you hear this at all, I highly recommend not. But if you still have to, give yourself some time to get back to it and be ready for it to absolutely rock your world in the worst way possible. So
that's all.
Brace yourself.
Yeah, needless to say, folks, Haley will not be adding carbs anytime soon. No fruit and honey for you, Haley. But
no, definitely not.
That'll be good. But yeah, you guys, thank you for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching, and if you are going to try the diet, you're going to try a carnivore experiment, or you already are, share the podcast because we're really trying to reach a new audience, right? Like, get this to people out there that otherwise would be skeptic when they hear maybe some of the very hardcore carnivore people out there that do content that are great. Don't get me wrong, but it can come across the wrong way because part of what happens is, you get so used to it, it becomes like this way, like nobody else can eat any other way, or they're all having these, but that's not where everybody's at, right?
Yeah.
So again, you got to find where people are at. You got to be able to help them where they are. And hopefully we take a stance with our type of podcast where we're talking about all the things of carnivore, but we're also trying to bring it to people that have said they would never do this. So if you got people in your environment that are like, I would never do carnivore, that's crazy, send them this damn podcast. I want to talk to them. I want them to listen to us, see what they think. Because again, it's all about hopefully enticing all of you out there to try your own carnivore experiment. Go for it. See what happens. Yeah. And give it a shot. Either way, that experiment can be 7 days. It can be a month. It could be whatever. Some people are like, oh, you have to do 90 days. That's, again, who's doing 90? Just try to do 72 hours, okay? See what happens. Try a day. Try a meal, folks, okay? Don't be trying to do the 90 days or the 10 years or whatever. Start with it one day at a time and see what it builds into, all right? Thank you guys for listening. Haley, where can they follow you at?
Coach Hood is my Instagram handle, and I post all things training, carnivore, all the goals, all the things we're trying to accomplish carnivore on there. So you can find all of that there.
Yeah, we'll talk a bit more about that in the powerlifting goal next episode. But for now, that's it, you guys. Thanks for listening.